The forest was still, almost unnervingly so, the kind of stillness that only winter can bring. Tom and his golden retriever, Charlie, were alone in the woods as they had been countless times before. The air was crisp, each breath visible in the cold. Snow crunched softly under their boots as they walked deeper into the woods, a peaceful hike on a quiet afternoon. But then Charlie stopped. At first Tom didn't notice. His eyes were focused on the path ahead, the trees bare and looming against the pale sky. But then he heard it. A low whine, almost a cry from Charlie. Tom glanced down. The dog was standing still, staring at something in the distance. "What is it, Charlie?" Tom asked, bending down to check. Charlie's eyes never left the snowbank before him. His tail stiffened, his body tense. He barked, not the cheerful bark he usually gave when he spotted a squirrel or a bird, but one that held urgency, even fear. His barks grew louder, more frantic. His paws scraped against the snow, digging deeper into the frozen mound. Tom felt a wave of confusion. There was nothing there, just snow. He shook his head, thinking it must be some trick of the wind, but Charlie's behavior didn't stop. He dug faster now, his movements almost desperate, eyes filled with something more than just instinct. Tom's heart began to race. "What's going on, boy?" he muttered, kneeling down beside Charlie. And then Tom's hand brushed something soft. His heart skipped a beat. Beneath the snow, wrapped in the cold embrace of winter, was a baby deer. Its tiny body shuddered with cold, barely breathing, its eyes wide with fear. Tom's throat tightened, and for a moment he couldn't move. The small creature in his arms was a newborn, no older than a few hours, struggling to survive the unforgiving cold. How had it gotten here, alone? Charlie whined, nudging the fragile deer with his nose, as if reassuring it that it wasn't alone anymore. The connection between the two, man and dog, human and animal, was clear. They couldn't leave the deer here. Not like this. Tom's hands shook as he lifted the baby deer, its fragile body trembling under his touch. He looked down at Charlie, who stood by him, tail wagging, eyes soft with compassion. The dog had saved this life, following an instinct that no one else would have noticed. The journey ahead would be long and perilous, but Tom made a silent promise to the fragile creature in his arms. "I won't let you die out here." As snow began to fall harder, blanketing the forest in a sea of white, Tom's determination set in. With Charlie at his side, they would find a way to save this little life. But what neither Tom nor Charlie knew was that this would be a rescue like no other, a story that would capture the hearts of many and change the lives of all involved. This was the tale of the guardian dog of the wild. Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something was different today. It was the same winter hike he and Charlie, his loyal golden retriever, had taken countless times before. The sky was a pale, gray canvas, the snow-laden trees standing like silent sentinels, their bare branches reaching up as if begging for warmth. The silence of the forest was soothing, almost hypnotic, and it felt like just another peaceful day. But Charlie, usually the one darting about excitedly in the snow, seemed unusually still. He trotted along beside Tom at first, his tail wagging in rhythm with the crunch of snow underfoot. Tom gave him a quick scratch behind the ears, a gesture of affection that had become second nature between them. "Ready to explore, boy?" Tom asked, smiling as Charlie looked up at him with bright eyes. Charlie's response was a sudden, sharp bark. It wasn't the usual playful bark that Tom had grown so used to hearing. No, this was different. There was something urgent, something unsettling about it. Tom stopped in his tracks. He turned, looking around the quiet forest. Nothing seemed out of place. A few birds fluttered between trees, and the wind whispered through the branches. But Charlie wasn't moving. He was staring, his eyes locked onto a small snowbank at the edge of the path, his body tense. Tom squinted in that direction. "Charlie, what is it, boy?" he muttered, his voice low, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile stillness. Charlie barked again, more insistently now. He padded towards the snowbank, his nose twitching in the cold air. Tom followed him, perplexed. "There's nothing there, Charlie. What's going on?" Charlie didn't stop. He began to dig, gently at first, his paws scraping against the snow with soft, rhythmic thuds. Tom frowned, bending down to try and pull him away. But Charlie resisted, giving a low growl that Tom had never heard before. There was a desperation in it, a feeling that something was wrong. "What's under there, boy?" Tom said, his voice thick with concern. Tom's fingers touched the snow where Charlie had been pawing. Beneath the cold, hard surface he felt something warm. His breath caught in his throat. He pushed more snow aside, his heart beginning to race as he realized that what Charlie had found wasn't a tree stump or some hidden branch. No, this was something alive. With trembling hands, Tom cleared away more of the snow, revealing a fragile, trembling form beneath the ice-cold blanket. A baby deer. The sight stopped him dead in his tracks. A tiny fawn, barely more than a few hours old, lay beneath the snow, its chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Its delicate body was thin and fragile, its fur matted with snow and ice. Its eyes were wide, fear shining in them as it looked up at Tom. Tom's heart squeezed in his chest. He quickly scanned the area, wondering how this little creature had ended up here, abandoned, exposed to the brutal cold. The deer's body trembled violently, the cold seeping deep into its fragile bones. "Charlie, you found it," Tom whispered, almost in disbelief. His golden retriever was still standing beside him, his tail wagging slowly, but there was no mistaking the pride in the dog's eyes. Charlie had found this little life in the vast expanse of the snow-covered woods, and now it was up to Tom to do something about it. Tom moved swiftly, scooping the baby deer gently into his arms. It was so light, so fragile, that it seemed like it might slip through his fingers at any moment. He felt the deer's heart pounding weakly against his chest, and he knew without a doubt that time was running out. "Hang in there, little one," Tom murmured, his voice low and soothing. He looked down at Charlie, who was standing by, watching the scene with a quiet understanding. There was no panic in the dog's eyes, only calm. Charlie had known exactly what to do. He had sensed the baby deer's distress and had not stopped until he had found it, uncovered it from the snow, and called Tom over. Tom's breath was shallow as he looked down at the fawn, its body trembling in his arms. He had to act fast. He couldn't let this little life slip away because of something as preventable as the cold. The nearest town was miles away, and the snowstorm was growing worse with every passing minute. The path back home was treacherous, the winds biting and fierce, but Tom knew that he couldn't just leave the baby deer here. Not after Charlie had shown him the way. Tom stood up slowly, cradling the fawn in his arms. The wind had picked up, swirling the snow around them in heavy gusts. It was going to be a difficult trek, but he wasn't going to abandon the deer. Not now. Not after everything Charlie had done to lead him here. Charlie walked beside him, staying close as if guiding the way. Tom tightened his grip on the fawn, his face set in determination. He had a decision to make, one that would change everything. And as they began the long journey back home, Charlie's quiet, steady presence by his side was the only reassurance Tom needed. They were a team. And no matter what the storm had in store, Tom knew they could make it together. The snowstorm had intensified by the time Tom and Charlie started their trek back through the forest. What had begun as a gentle dusting of snow had quickly turned into a full-blown blizzard. The wind howled, biting through the layers of warmth Tom had carefully bundled himself in. But even as the cold gnawed at his skin, his mind remained focused on the fragile life in his arms. The baby deer, its small body trembling uncontrollably, was barely able to lift its head. Each time it moved, it winced in pain. Tom could feel its fragile heart thudding weakly against his chest, and he couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. Charlie stayed close, his golden fur a stark contrast against the white backdrop of snow. The dog's eyes were keen, scanning the terrain as they walked, as if sensing that they were on a mission. He walked with purpose, stopping only occasionally to look back at Tom, his tail swishing in quiet reassurance. There was something so calm, so determined about the dog's presence that it made Tom feel less alone, less overwhelmed by the task ahead. They had a long way to go, and every step seemed to feel heavier as the snow deepened underfoot. Tom's legs were beginning to ache, his boots sinking deeper into the snow with each step. But it was the baby deer in his arms that weighed most heavily on his mind. He had to get it to safety. He had to make it through the storm. "There's a cabin just up ahead," Tom muttered to himself, though he wasn't entirely sure. He had walked this trail dozens of times over the years, but never in these kinds of conditions. The world around him was a blur of white, the wind screaming in his ears. He could barely see past the end of his nose. But he trusted his instincts. He had to. Charlie seemed to sense this too. He suddenly darted ahead, his body sleek and swift despite the deep snow, and then stopped, turning to look back at Tom with an expression that was all too clear. "Hurry up, we're almost there." Tom forced his legs to move faster, the pain in his knees beginning to ache, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was the baby deer, still so small and fragile, nestled against his chest. Its tiny breath was faint, barely a whisper in the wind. As they rounded a bend in the path, Tom spotted it, a faint silhouette against the snow, barely visible. It was the small wooden cabin he had seen on past hikes, an old hunting lodge that had been abandoned for years. It wasn't much, but it would provide shelter from the storm. The moment he reached the cabin, Tom hurried inside, pushing open the creaky door with a strength fueled by sheer desperation. Inside, the air was cold and stale, but it was better than being out in the storm. Tom quickly found a small cot in the corner of the room and carefully placed the baby deer down. He took off his coat and wrapped it around the fawn, desperate to give it some warmth. Charlie immediately lay down beside it, his warm body providing an additional source of heat. Tom sank to his knees beside the fawn, his hands shaking as he brushed the snow from its tiny body. He could feel it shivering, the icy cold that had seeped deep into its bones. The baby deer's body was too cold to respond, its chest barely rising and falling with each fragile breath. Tom had seen enough to know that if the fawn didn't warm up soon, it would die. There was no time to waste. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the panic rising in his chest. Stay calm, he told himself. Just stay calm and you'll figure this out. Charlie remained beside the fawn, his gaze never leaving it. The dog's steady presence was a comfort, but Tom knew it wasn't enough. He had to do more. Charlie, stay with him, Tom said softly as he stood up and moved to the small wood stove in the corner of the cabin. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He quickly set about gathering what little firewood there was, using the last of his strength to get a flame going. The crackling of the fire was the only sound in the cabin, adding to the tension that hung thick in the air. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Tom kept glancing back at the fawn, but it hadn't moved. It was as if the life was draining from it before his eyes. Come on, little one, Tom whispered, kneeling beside it again. Please hang on. He gently cupped the baby deer's head in his hands, speaking softly to it, hoping that somehow his voice might bring comfort. You're safe now. You're not alone. Charlie pressed his nose against the deer's side, his warm breath sending puffs of air across its body. The dog's warmth seemed to have a small but noticeable effect. The deer's shivering began to lessen, ever so slightly. Its breath steadied and Tom's heart skipped a beat. Is it enough? He wondered. Is it too late? Tom didn't know. All he could do was wait and pray as the storm raged outside, the fire crackling in the corner and Charlie's steady presence beside him. The fire crackled steadily, filling the cabin with its warmth, but it wasn't enough. Tom's hands trembled as he checked the baby deer once again, feeling for its heartbeat. His fingers gently brushed against the fragile body, trying to detect any sign of life that might reassure him. There was still no movement. Tom swallowed hard, his throat tight with worry. He had seen animals in this condition before, but never one so young, so vulnerable. The baby deer's tiny frame was still too cold, its body stiff and unmoving. Charlie, as if sensing his worry, shifted beside the fawn. The dog nudged its side gently with his nose, his breath warm against the deer's shivering body. Tom watched with bated breath. Could it really be enough? Could the warmth of the fire and Charlie's presence help pull this tiny creature from the edge of death? The cabin, though cold and dark, had become their sanctuary, a place where for a brief moment time seemed to stop. The wind outside howled fiercely, its icy tendrils clawing at the walls. But here inside they had a chance. At least that's what Tom kept telling himself. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and Tom's exhaustion began to take hold. The strain of the journey through the snowstorm, the fear for the fawn's survival, and the biting cold that had settled deep in his bones were all starting to wear him down. He couldn't afford to stop, not yet. Not when the deer still clung to life. Come on, little one, Tom whispered, kneeling beside the fawn once more. He placed one hand over the fawn's chest, feeling the faint rise and fall of its breaths. It was a small comfort, but not enough. Charlie moved closer, curling up around the fawn, his warm body a blanket of protection. The dog's eyes met Tom's, filled with a quiet resolve. It was as though Charlie understood the weight of the situation more than words could express. In that moment, Tom realized something. Charlie wasn't just a dog. He was the guardian of the wild, the protector of the helpless. He had found the fawn in the snow. He had led Tom here through the storm with unwavering certainty. And now, as the dog lay beside the fawn, doing what he could to help it survive, Tom couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. We're in this together, buddy, Tom said softly, reaching out to pat Charlie's head. Charlie looked up, his eyes gleaming with a quiet understanding. It was as if he knew the importance of this moment, that his role wasn't over yet. The dog wasn't just offering warmth, he was offering something more. It was a message of hope, a promise that they wouldn't give up on this tiny life. The minutes ticked by, each one bringing new uncertainty. The fire had begun to dwindle and the room was growing colder again. Tom could feel his own fatigue creeping up on him, but he refused to let it show. He needed to keep fighting for the fawn. He had to keep trying. "Please, little one, hold on," he murmured. Then, as if in response to his plea, something changed. The fawn's chest gave a small but definite rise. A soft exhale of breath escaped its lips. It was enough to make Tom's heart race with hope. He leaned forward, watching intently as the fawn's eyes fluttered open, their dark gaze locking with his. It wasn't much, but it was a sign. A small sign that the fawn was still with them. Charlie let out a soft, low whine as if to acknowledge the shift. The fawn's breathing had become more steady, and though it still trembled from the cold, it no longer seemed to be slipping away. Tom felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he knew they couldn't stop now. The fawn was still far from safe. The storm outside was fierce and they were miles from help. Tom needed to find more ways to warm the fawn, to keep it alive long enough to get it somewhere safer. He stood up, pacing the small cabin, his mind racing. He couldn't stay here forever. The storm was only getting worse. But what else could he do? That's when he remembered the old blankets in the back of the cabin. They weren't much, but they might be enough to help the fawn stay warm. He quickly made his way to the storage cupboard and pulled out the tattered old woolen blankets, rushing back to the fawn's side. Charlie looked up as Tom laid the blankets over the deer, wrapping them as carefully as he could around its tiny body. He tucked the edges of the blankets in tightly, trying to create as much warmth as possible. He knew he had to keep it warm, that was the only way the fawn would survive. He sat down beside it again, holding the fawn close to his chest, praying that it would continue to improve. The minutes passed and Tom kept his focus. He wouldn't let the baby deer slip away. Not now. Not when they had come this far. And then, as if by some miracle, the fawn gave a little cry. It was weak, a fragile sound, but it was enough to send a thrill of relief through Tom. It had a voice. It was still alive. Charlie, sensing the change, wagged his tail gently, his eyes filled with quiet satisfaction. He had done it. They had done it together. The night seemed to stretch on forever, but the storm outside had begun to slow. The wind no longer howled against the cabin's fragile walls, and the blizzard outside seemed to have finally lost its fury. Still, Tom remained on edge, watching over the baby deer like a sentinel. His body ached from the cold, from the exhaustion of the past few hours, but he refused to rest. Not when the fawn needed him. Charlie lay beside the fawn, his large, golden body curled protectively around it. His soft, steady breathing was a constant reassurance. Tom found himself turning to the dog for strength, knowing that Charlie would never let him down. There was something about the dog's presence that calmed him, something that gave him the courage to keep going. The baby deer had stopped trembling for the most part, though it was still weak. Its chest rose and fell slowly, and Tom noticed it was starting to take deeper breaths. It was a good sign. A faint but unmistakable glimmer of hope. Charlie shifted, lifting his head and looking up at Tom with those soulful eyes. It was as if the dog knew what Tom was thinking, that they weren't out of the woods yet, that there was still a long road ahead. But the fawn had survived the night. That was the first step toward recovery. Tom glanced at the small window, watching the last traces of snow swirl in the dim light of early morning. It was still early, but the storm had passed. The sky was clearing up, revealing a pale blue light as the sun began to rise. The storm had left a thick blanket of snow behind, transforming the world outside into a shimmering, frozen wonderland. But it wasn't the view outside that captured Tom's attention. It was the baby deer. The fawn was still alive, and that was all that mattered. He gently reached out to touch the fawn's side, his fingers brushing against its soft coat. The deer's body was warmer now, its breathing steadier. Tom smiled, feeling a surge of relief. It was going to be okay. It had to be. But there was one thing Tom knew, they couldn't stay here forever. The cabin was only temporary shelter, and even though the storm had passed, they were still a long way from safety. He had to get the fawn to a wildlife sanctuary, somewhere that could care for it properly. But the nearest town was miles away, and the trek through the snow-covered forest would be a challenge. It would be another dangerous journey. Tom stood up, stretching his stiff legs. He had to start thinking about their next steps. He couldn't afford to waste time, not when the fawn's survival depended on it. He would need more supplies. And most importantly, he needed to find a way to get the baby deer to safety. Charlie, sensing the change in the air, rose to his feet as well. The dog's sharp eyes flickered toward Tom as if asking, "What's next?" "We'll get through this, buddy," Tom said softly, patting Charlie's head. "Just one step at a time." Tom moved toward the small cabinet near the stove, pulling out some of the remaining food and supplies he had brought with him. There wasn't much, but it would have to do. They would have to be resourceful, make the best of what they had. The fawn stirred slightly as Tom prepared to leave. It shifted in the blankets, its head lifting ever so slightly, as if it were aware of the looming journey ahead. It was still too weak to walk, but the fact that it had lifted its head even for a moment was another sign of progress. Tom's heart swelled with hope. It was a small victory, but it felt like everything. Charlie padded over to the fawn, nudging its side with his nose as if to check on it once more. The fawn blinked, meeting Charlie's gaze with a quiet recognition. Tom smiled, watching the two of them for a moment. It was a strange thing, this bond between a man, a dog, and a wild animal. But it was real. And it was growing stronger with each passing hour. After a few more moments of silence, Tom took a deep breath and began preparing for their next step. The journey wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. They still had a long way to go before the fawn would be truly safe, but Tom was determined. "We'll make it," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "We have to." Charlie gave a low bark as if in agreement. The dog's tail wagged once, slowly, his eyes filled with unwavering loyalty. They were in this together, all three of them. And as long as they had each other, there was hope. Tom packed a small bag with trembling hands. His fingers were stiff from the cold, but his mind was sharp, focused. In the bag he placed a flask of water, 2 granola bars, a small medical kit he kept by habit, and an old, thick woolen blanket, a gift from his wife long ago before she passed. He knelt beside the baby deer, carefully wrapping it in the blanket. The tiny creature was so fragile, its ribs visible under thin, damp fur. Its tiny chest rose and fell weakly. Tom's heart clenched. Every second counted. Charlie sat at the door, golden fur puffed out against the cold draft coming through the cracks. His tail wagged slowly, his eyes locked on Tom as if saying, "I'm ready whenever you are." Tom zipped up his thick jacket, pulled on his gloves, and took a deep breath. "All right, boy," he whispered. "Let's bring her home." He opened the door, and a blast of icy air slapped his face. Outside, the storm had finally settled into a quiet, heavy snowfall. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches sagging under thick layers of white. Everything was muffled, still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Tom stepped into the snow, cradling the baby deer close to his chest. The snow came up past his knees, making every movement slow and heavy. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward. Charlie bounded ahead, creating a rough path, his nose to the ground, ears pricked. It wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. It was a battle. Every few steps, Tom glanced down at the fawn, watching for any signs of distress. The little creature's eyes were half closed, but it was breathing, clinging stubbornly to life. That stubbornness sparked something deep inside Tom. He thought of Ellie, his wife. He remembered how she used to stop in the middle of a walk just to rescue a stranded turtle, or sit for hours nursing an injured bird. "Life is life, no matter how small," she used to say. Tom blinked hard, forcing back the sting in his eyes. The forest was a maze of white and gray. Familiar paths were buried under drifts of snow. Landmarks disappeared. But Tom trusted his instincts. And he trusted Charlie. The dog was a golden blur ahead of him, occasionally stopping to bark softly, urging Tom on. His energy was tireless, his spirit unbreakable. Every time Tom faltered, Charlie would run back, circle him, nudge his hand. "Keep moving. Don't give up." Tom spoke to the fawn in soft murmurs as they trudged on. "You're doing good, little one. Hang on a bit longer." Hours seemed to stretch into an endless white eternity. The cold seeped deeper into Tom's bones. His legs ached, his boots were soaked. But the thought of the tiny life in his arms kept him moving. The sun peeked weakly through a break in the clouds, casting a pale golden light across the snow. In the distance Tom saw it, the faint outline of a trail. It led up a small hill, and if memory served him right, that trail eventually connected to an old service road. Relief flooded him, but it was short-lived. The hill was steep and the snow made it treacherous. Tom tightened his grip on the fawn and started the climb. Each step was agony. His muscles screamed in protest. He slipped once, landing hard on one knee. The impact sent a jolt of pain up his leg. Charlie barked sharply, running back to him. The dog whined, nudging Tom's arm, his warm breath a comfort against Tom's freezing skin. "I'm okay, buddy," Tom gasped, though he wasn't sure he believed it. He struggled to his feet, cradling the fawn close. One step at a time, he told himself. Just one more step. The higher they climbed, the more the forest opened up around them. The trees thinned. The wind picked up, sharp and biting. Tom felt exposed, vulnerable. Every instinct told him they were being watched. A branch snapped somewhere to his left. Tom froze, heart hammering in his chest. Charlie growled low in his throat, standing protectively between Tom and the unseen threat. Another snap. A flicker of movement. Tom caught a glimpse of gray fur slipping between the trees, a coyote. Maybe more than one. Fear clawed at him, cold and primal. He couldn't outrun them. He couldn't fight them, not with a baby deer in his arms. But Charlie stood firm, hackles raised, teeth bared. Tom squared his shoulders. He wasn't about to give up now. He shouted, loud and fierce, waving one arm. "Get out of here." Charlie barked furiously, lunging forward. For a moment the coyotes hesitated, and then, slowly they melted back into the trees. Tom's legs nearly gave out with relief. He leaned heavily on Charlie for a moment, murmuring, "Good boy. Good boy." They crested the hill and there, far below, Tom saw it, the service road. A ribbon of dark gray cutting through the endless white. They had made it. Tom let out a choked sob, a mix of exhaustion and triumph. Charlie barked happily, dancing in the snow. The road was still a distance away, but for the first time since this ordeal began, hope flared bright in Tom's chest. He shifted the fawn carefully in his arms and started down the hill, Charlie leading the way. They weren't safe yet, but they were close. Closer than they'd ever been. They moved quickly, efficiently, whisking the fawn inside the warm shelter. Tom and Charlie followed close behind, stamping snow from their boots and paws. Inside, the heat hit Tom like a wave. It smelled of hay, antiseptic, and something sweeter, the smell of care and hope. Anna and the others sprang into action. They placed the fawn on a padded table under a heat lamp. One volunteer gently wiped the tiny body with warm cloths, while another checked its heartbeat and breathing. Tom stood back, hands trembling, heart pounding. He watched every small movement, barely daring to breathe. Charlie sat beside him, tail wagging slowly, eyes fixed on the fawn as if willing it to survive. Anna turned, her face soft with gratitude. "You got it here just in time," she said. "Another hour out there and—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Tom swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in his eyes. He dropped to one knee beside Charlie, wrapping his arms around the golden retriever's neck. "Good boy," he whispered hoarsely. "Good boy, Charlie. You saved her." Charlie gave a soft, contented woof and nuzzled Tom's cheek. The volunteers worked for what felt like hours. Warming fluids were given, tiny hooves were checked for frostbite, and the fawn's breathing grew stronger, steadier. Tom sat in a corner, exhausted, watching it all unfold. Memories crashed over him, carrying Ellie to safety during a storm, sitting by her hospital bed night after night, willing her to wake up. He couldn't save Ellie. But maybe, just maybe, he had saved this little one. But maybe, just maybe, he had saved this little one. A volunteer brought him a cup of hot coffee, and he accepted it gratefully, cradling it between his frozen hands. As he sipped, Anna came over and sat beside him. "She's stable now," she said quietly. "She'll need monitoring, but she's a fighter." Tom let out a shaky breath. Relief flooded him, so sharp it hurt. Anna smiled at Charlie, scratching behind his ears. "And you," she said warmly, "you're a hero." Charlie wagged his tail proudly, his eyes shining. Tom looked at his old dog, his companion through thick and thin, and felt a lump rise in his throat. "I don't know what made him bark like that," Tom murmured. "But he knew." "He knew." Anna nodded. "Sometimes they just do. Some dogs, they have a sixth sense about life, about danger." Tom reached into his coat and pulled out the collar tag Ellie had given Charlie years ago, a tiny silver heart with the words Guardian Angel engraved on it. He rubbed it between his fingers, smiling sadly. "You always were her angel," he whispered. "Now you're mine too." Anna's eyes misted over, but she just patted his hand and stood up. "You're welcome to stay a while. She'll sleep for a few hours now. She's safe." Tom nodded, feeling the weariness catch up with him all at once. He leaned back in the chair, Charlie's warm body pressed against his leg, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to rest. Outside the storm raged on. But inside there was warmth, hope, and the quiet bond between a man, his dog, and the life they had saved together. Tom and Charlie stayed in the shelter long after the snow had stopped falling outside. Tom dozed lightly in the chair, his hand always resting on Charlie's soft fur. Every so often, he'd open his eyes and glance over at the tiny fawn sleeping under the warm glow of the heat lamp, just to make sure she was still breathing. Charlie stayed alert, his golden head tilted, eyes half closed but ears perked, as if guarding the fawn even in rest. Word of their rescue spread faster than Tom could have ever imagined. One of the volunteers had snapped a photo, Tom looking worried and worn, kneeling beside Charlie and the bundled fawn. They posted it to the shelter's social media page with a simple caption. Guardian dog of the wild, Charlie the golden retriever saves a life. Within hours the post went viral. Tom's phone buzzed nonstop. Messages poured in. News outlets called the shelter asking for interviews. People from all over the country left comments, sending prayers, blessings and donations to the wildlife center. Tom was overwhelmed. He wasn't used to attention. He lived a quiet life, had always liked it that way. But Charlie? Charlie basked in it. When a local reporter arrived, microphone in hand, Charlie trotted right up, tail wagging furiously, posing like he knew exactly what was happening. Tom chuckled despite himself. He knelt down beside his old friend, ruffling his fur. You're a natural-born star, aren't you, boy? Charlie barked once, short and proud. The reporter asked Tom about the rescue, about what made him stop, about Charlie's barking. Tom answered quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Charlie wouldn't let it go. He knew something was wrong. I just followed him. And what were you thinking when you found the fawn? The reporter asked gently. Tom looked at the tiny sleeping figure, his heart twisting. I thought about how fragile life is. How sometimes all it takes is one good soul to make the difference between life and death. The reporter's eyes softened. And that soul was Charlie. Tom smiled. Yeah, Charlie. The news clip aired that night. Tom sat on the couch with Charlie sprawled beside him, watching themselves on TV. The camera showed the photo of Charlie, the fawn, and Tom, a moment frozen in time, full of hope and quiet heroism. For the first time in a long time, Tom felt something stir deep inside him. Pride. Not the noisy, boastful kind. A gentle, quiet pride that filled the cracks grief had left behind. Charlie had saved more than just a life out there in the snow. He had saved Tom too. Later that evening, after the buzz died down, Tom stood by the window looking out at the stars. Charlie sat at his feet, yawning. You did good today, buddy, Tom murmured. Real good. Charlie wagged his tail lazily and leaned against Tom's leg, warm and solid. Tom bent down, resting his forehead against Charlie's. We make a pretty good team, don't we? He whispered. Outside, the world was still, the night deep and quiet. Inside, for the first time in what felt like forever, Tom's heart was at peace. And somewhere in the shelter's nursery, under the gentle hum of the heater, a tiny fawn slept soundly, safe, warm, and alive, because of a golden dog who simply wouldn't stop barking. Because sometimes love doesn't roar. Sometimes it barks. And it saves the world. The little deer, now named Willow by Tom, grew stronger with each passing day. Under the warm roof of Tom's cabin, with Charlie, the golden retriever, by her side, the once shivering bundle of life had turned into a symbol of pure resilience. Tom would often sit by the fireplace, sipping his tea, watching Willow trying to stand on her fragile legs while Charlie watched over her with the proud eyes of a big brother. Sometimes Charlie would gently nudge Willow with his nose, encouraging her when she stumbled. It was a simple, beautiful sight, and to Tom, it felt like his home had come alive again. Ever since his wife's passing, the house had felt hollow. Echoes of memories floated through the empty rooms, but now laughter, small clumsy steps, and joyful barks filled the air once more. One evening, as the golden sunset streamed through the windows, Tom sat in his worn armchair, looking at the two companions napping together on the rug. A soft smile formed on his lips, but then, unexpectedly, his eyes brimmed with tears. Charlie noticed. He slowly got up and walked over to Tom, resting his head on Tom's knee. Tom chuckled through the tears, ruffling Charlie's soft fur. You're something else, aren't you, boy? You brought me back to life too, he whispered, voice thick with emotion. He realized then that Charlie's barking at the snowbank wasn't just instinct. It was destiny. Without Charlie's stubbornness, Willow would have perished. And without Willow, Tom might never have found the will to truly live again. The world outside Tom's cabin hadn't forgotten either. The video of Charlie barking furiously at the snowbank, then jumping excitedly as Tom pulled Willow out, had exploded online. Tom's neighbor had uploaded it without telling him, and now the guardian dog of the wild had become a sensation. People from all over the country were sending letters, blankets, and donations for Willow. Children sent hand-drawn pictures of Charlie and Willow, while old couples wrote heartfelt notes saying the story had given them hope during a dark winter. Tom was overwhelmed. One chilly morning, a news van rolled up to his driveway. Reporters bundled in heavy coats came knocking. Tom, never much for attention, hesitated. But Charlie wagged his tail so hard the whole porch shook. Tom laughed. All right, you ham. Let's give them a show. Standing before the cameras, Tom spoke simply but powerfully. It wasn't me who saved her. "It was him," he said, patting Charlie's head. "This dog, he's got a heart bigger than most men I know." Charlie sat proudly at Tom's feet, Willow curled up beside him like a small fawn returned to her rightful family. The story aired nationwide that night, and people cried in living rooms across the UK. An elderly woman in Wales called the television station, her voice trembling with emotion, saying, "Please tell that gentleman he's restored my faith and kindness." Another man, a war veteran from Scotland, wrote a letter saying he hadn't smiled in years, until he watched Charlie paw at the snowbank like a creature sent straight from heaven. Back at the cabin, Tom's life was forever changed. He started taking Willow and Charlie on slow walks through the forest trails behind the house. Willow, still a little wobbly, would stick close to Charlie's side, sometimes even hiding under his belly when the wind howled too loud. Tom found himself talking to them more than he ever had to any human in years. He spoke of his wife, of the loneliness he had buried deep inside, and how two innocent souls had somehow found a way to heal his broken heart. And Charlie, dear Charlie, listened like he understood every word. Sometimes he would tilt his head, sometimes he would nuzzle Tom's hand gently, reminding him that no words were needed between friends like them. One evening, as Tom sat carving a small wooden plaque for the front of his house, he thought about what to name it. The cabin had once been just a lonely place on the edge of the woods. Now it was a home filled with second chances. He smiled as he carefully etched the words, "Willow's Watch, where hope finds a home." And underneath, he carved a paw print and a little hoof print side by side. Charlie barked happily as Tom held up the finished plaque. Willow, growing stronger every day, stumbled over to sniff it, her tiny nose twitching. Tom laughed, a sound so rich and free it startled even himself. He knelt down, pulling both Charlie and Willow into a hug, burying his face into their warm fur. "I love you both," he whispered, his voice breaking. "More than I ever thought I could love anything again." The fire crackled warmly inside the house, the stars blinked awake above the forest, and somewhere deep in the woods, the world seemed to exhale a soft, contented sigh. Thanks to a golden dog who refused to give up, and a tiny deer who refused to die, a broken man found his way back to life. And it all started with one bark, and a pile of snow. The snow had melted, and the forest around Tom's cabin had begun to show signs of life once more. The trees stood tall, their branches swelling with buds, while the birds had returned, singing melodies that filled the air. Spring was on its way, bringing a fresh promise of growth and renewal. But within Tom's home, things had changed. The once lonely space now buzzed with warmth, thanks to Charlie and Willow. The golden retriever had become an inseparable companion to the young deer, her presence a reminder of the miracle that had unfolded that fateful day. Tom would wake up every morning to the sight of Willow and Charlie curled up together near the fireplace. Charlie, ever protective, would nudge Willow when she stirred, making sure she stayed warm. Willow, now full of life, had learned to trust Charlie, following him around the cabin and even attempting to play with him. Her little hooves would tap against the floor in excitement as Charlie would chase after her, his tail wagging wildly. But despite the joy they brought, Tom could feel the weight of time pressing on him. As much as he loved Willow and as deeply as his bond with her had grown, he knew the time had come for her to return to the wild. Tom had never been the kind of man to hold on to something that wasn't his to keep, and the more Willow grew, the more he realized that she wasn't meant to stay inside four walls forever. She belonged to the forest, the place where she had been born. One cold morning, as Tom sipped his tea by the window, Charlie padded over and sat at his feet. The dog's eyes were soft, but Tom could see the question in them. He had known this moment would come, but that didn't make it any easier. "I know, buddy," Tom whispered to Charlie, his voice thick with emotion. "I know it's time. But I'm not sure I'm ready to let her go." Charlie responded by resting his head on Tom's knee, looking up at him with an understanding that only a dog could possess. It was as if Charlie knew this was the right thing to do, even if it hurt. Tom stood up and walked over to the small table where he kept Willow's favorite blanket. It was frayed at the edges, worn from the many nights she had curled up on it, but it was still hers. He knew it was time to let her go back to where she belonged, even if his heart ached. Willow had made it clear to him, in her own silent way, that she was ready. She had grown strong enough to face the world outside. The next morning, Tom called the Wildlife Rescue Center. The woman on the other end of the phone was kind and understanding, her voice soothing to Tom's anxious mind. "We've been following Willow's progress, Mr. Benson. She's doing beautifully. If you're ready to release her, we'll take her to a protected reserve where she can grow with other deer, in a place far from harm. You've done an incredible job and we'll make sure she's safe." Tom hesitated for only a moment. It was the right thing to do, but that didn't make it any easier. "Thank you," he said, his voice strained. He hung up the phone and walked to the living room where Willow and Charlie were resting. Willow had grown into a graceful young deer, her legs sturdy and strong. She could run, leap, and navigate the forest with ease, but she still looked to Charlie for guidance, just as she had on the day Tom had saved her. Charlie, ever the loyal protector, sat by her side, his gaze soft and comforting. It was clear that he, too, had sensed the change in the air. Tom crouched down beside Willow, his hand gently stroking her soft fur. "You're ready now, Willow," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You'll always have a place in my heart. And you'll always have Charlie with you in spirit." That afternoon, the rescue center arrived with a large, weathered van, ready to take Willow to her new home. As Tom watched the van pull up to his driveway, he couldn't help but feel a deep sorrow settle in his chest. This was it. Willow stood by the door, her ears flicking back and forth, as if sensing that something was about to change. She walked over to Charlie, who nudged her gently with his nose as if saying goodbye without words. Tom's heart was heavy. He had loved this deer like she was his own daughter, and it hurt more than he could have ever imagined to let her go. But he knew it was the right thing. He took one last moment to look at her, her large brown eyes filled with innocence and trust. He gently cupped her face in his hands. "Go on, sweet girl," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Live your life. Be free." The rescuers handled Willow carefully, placing her in the back of the van. Charlie watched, his tail wagging slowly, his eyes full of an understanding that only he could fully grasp. Tom stood there watching the van drive away until it was out of sight. The cabin was eerily quiet after that. The space that had once felt so full of life now felt hollow. Charlie lay by the door, his eyes trained on the path where the van had disappeared. Tom sat by the window, his hands trembling as he watched the forest, waiting for any sign of Willow's return. But the days turned into weeks and still there was no sign. Tom felt the ache in his chest every day, but he knew deep down that Willow was where she was meant to be. One crisp morning, Tom decided to take Charlie for a walk through the woods. They followed the familiar trail, Charlie's paws making soft imprints in the dew-soaked earth. Tom breathed in the fresh, cool air, feeling the weight of everything lift from his shoulders. And then, as if the universe had conspired to bring them together one last time, Charlie stopped. His nose twitched. His ears pricked up. And there, standing in a clearing, was Willow. She was no longer the fragile fawn Tom had found in the snow. She was strong, graceful, and free. Her coat gleamed in the morning light, and she was surrounded by the life of the forest. Birds singing, flowers blooming, and the gentle breeze rustling through the trees. Willow stood tall, her eyes meeting Tom's. She didn't run this time. She just watched as if saying, "Thank you for everything." Charlie let out a joyful bark and bounded toward her. Willow didn't run away. She stood her ground, and for a moment, it was as if the world held its breath. Tom couldn't help but smile, tears welling in his eyes. "She's home, buddy," Tom whispered, his voice filled with pride and love. "She's home." And with one final glance, Willow turned and disappeared into the woods, her figure melding with the trees. Tom stood there for a long time, holding Charlie close. There was peace in his heart now, peace in knowing that Willow was exactly where she was meant to be. The seasons shifted as they always did, bringing with them change that was both beautiful and inevitable. Tom found himself walking the same forest trails he had walked countless times before, yet now they felt different. The forest was still alive, filled with the rustle of leaves, the chirps of birds, and the distant sound of a creek flowing. But there was a stillness in Tom's heart, peaceful yet bittersweet. Charlie trotted beside him, his pace slow and steady. The old dog, his fur now speckled with gray, had grown wiser with each passing year, and Tom couldn't help but notice the quiet pride in his eyes. Charlie had always been more than a dog. He was a companion, a protector, and a bridge to the beauty of life itself. Through the winter storms, the cold nights, and the moments of fear and doubt, Charlie had remained by Tom's side, never wavering in his loyalty. Tom took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp air that seemed to cleanse his soul. It had been months since Willow had returned to the wild, and yet the memory of that day stayed fresh in his mind, as vivid as if it had happened only yesterday. He could still remember the look in Willow's eyes when she had stood in the clearing, proud and free. It was a look of gratitude, of strength, and of quiet acceptance. As Tom walked, he thought back to the time when he first found Willow, the fragile fawn caught in the snow, and how Charlie had been the one to lead him to her. How the dog had known, long before Tom had, that something miraculous was unfolding. It was Charlie's persistence that had saved Willow's life, and it was Charlie's presence that had brought so much comfort during the weeks that followed. But now, as they reached the edge of the forest, Tom knew it was time to embrace the next chapter of their journey. Charlie was slowing down, his steps less certain than before, and Tom could feel that the dog had lived a full and meaningful life. The bond they shared was unspoken but so deep that words didn't need to be said. That afternoon, Tom sat down at his desk, looking out the window at the vast expanse of the forest. He opened a letter he had been meaning to write for weeks but had not yet found the courage to finish. It was addressed to the wildlife reserve where Willow had been taken after her release. Tom wanted to share the story of their bond, of how a simple act of kindness had brought a young deer back to life. He wanted them to know how Willow had flourished under his care, how she had found her place in the world. But most of all, Tom wanted them to understand that it wasn't just Willow who had changed, he had changed too. His life had been one of solitude before Willow had come into it, but now, it was filled with memories of unexpected love and quiet miracles. He had learned that life had a way of surprising him, of showing him that there was more to the world than what he had ever imagined. Tom placed the pen down and let out a long, deep sigh. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of closure. It wasn't just about Willow returning to the wild, it was about understanding that all things had a purpose, and all journeys, no matter how short or long, had meaning. Charlie, who had been lying quietly by the fireplace, slowly lifted his head at the sound of the door creaking open. Tom smiled as he walked over to the old dog, bending down to give him a gentle scratch behind the ears. "Buddy," Tom murmured softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You've been with me through it all. From the first day we found Willow to this moment now. You've made my life better than I could have ever imagined." Charlie's eyes were kind, wise, and full of affection. The dog didn't need to say a word. His gaze said everything. He was ready. Ready to rest, ready to leave this world in peace, knowing he had done his part. Tom's heart clenched as he held the dog close, understanding the silent message that passed between them. It wasn't just the world that changed that day. Tom did too. He had learned how to love without restraint, to give without expecting anything in return. He had learned that sometimes, the greatest gift you can give is the freedom to be who you are, wherever that might be. As the sun set that evening, casting a soft golden light across the cabin, Tom felt a quiet peace settle in his soul. The warmth of the fire flickered in the hearth, and Charlie lay contentedly by his side, his breathing slow and steady. Tomorrow Tom would take Charlie on one last walk through the woods. He would let the old dog rest in the place where they had both found their most cherished memories. And then they would let go. But tonight they would sit together in the stillness, knowing that no matter what came next, the love they had shared would always remain. Charlie's story teaches us that acts of kindness, no matter how small, can change lives in ways we never expect. If this story touched your heart, share it with your loved ones, because sometimes, the most unexpected connections are the ones that matter the most. And remember, just like Charlie, we can all be guardians of the wild. Leave a comment below and let us know how you've experienced moments of unexpected love and kindness in your life. Don't forget to subscribe to stay inspired by more real-life stories of love, courage, and compassion. Together, we can make the world a kinder place.